Hi, and welcome to Interpersonal Communication Chapter 1. This is Doran O'Donnell. Today we will be talking about the communication principles from Vertebra and Vertebra Chapter 1. So why do we communicate? Well, we communicate for lots of reasons. First is to share meaning. So you think about everything that you do in life, uh, from buying groceries to pumping gas. Uh, we, in almost all of these instances, we need to share meaning with another person in order to get our message across. Can you imagine if you went to the coffee shop and you ordered a latte and they gave you something, they gave you a cup of tea instead? If you didn't share that meaning, then we wouldn't be communicating very well. So we use communication, first of all, to share meaning. Second, we use communication to meet our social goals. This is how we get our friends. And if you think about your closest friendships, you typically communicate more often and more in depth with those close friends than you do with acquaintances. And it's through communication that we actually create our relationships. Third, we also use communication to manage our personal identity. And I know that a lot of you, including me, have Facebook or we have Instagram or other types of social media, and we try to portray a certain image through that media, and because we want others to view us a certain way. So if you look at this, there's a researcher named Barnland who came up with a concept of 6 cells. And what he's talking about is in any communication event where there's 2 people involved in that communication event, there's really 6 people involved in that communication event, not just 2. First, there's me, and then there's you. Me, this is who I am, all my faults, all my problems, all my past, the way I view life, everything about me. And then there's you, and this is who you are, your past life, everything that's happened to you, all of your insecurities and all that as well. But then there's also who you think I am and who I think you are. And these are different people. So who you think I am and who I think you are 2 totally different people than me and you. Even if you're really close to me, who you think I am is not who I am. And vice versa. No matter how close I am to you, who I think you are is not who you really are. We still have these images that we are portraying, and that's creating this disconnect. So this is good because we don't necessarily want somebody to understand all of our insecurities and who we really are. And then there's finally who I think you think I am and who you think I think you are. So who I think you think I am and who you think I think you are different than either me or you, or who you think I am or who I think you are. So this gets a little convoluted, but who I think you think I am trying to portray an image of myself to you, and I'm trying to figure out what is the best message to give you to make you think about who I am the way I want you to. But that isn't necessarily who you think I am, and vice versa. So we have these 6 selves that we're trying to manage in our personal identity. And if Facebook's an easy example of this, when you take a photo of yourself for Facebook and you're going to post it on Facebook, you normally don't take the first selfie. You take 3 or 4 different selfies and then you choose the best one. And why do we do that? Because we want to portray an image that is not exactly who we are. And Barnland, I think, does a fairly good job at explaining why we go about doing that or how we go about doing that. And then finally, we conduct our relationships through communication. So we try to meet our social goals to get friends, and we also use that. Once we have those friends, we use communication to conduct those relationships, to let people know that we care about them, or vice versa, that we don't care about them. So these are the basic reasons why we communicate. So, in order for us to understand and study communication, we have to have some basic fundamental rules or some fundamental understandings regarding communication. And we call these principles. Just like in philosophy, where you have to believe that we do exist in order to talk about the meaning of our existence, with communication, we have to have some basic understandings regarding communication that we can follow in order to help us study communication. So the first principle is that communication is predicated on the past. What that means is basically we learn our language and our behavior from past experiences. So you think about a child and how they go about learning language. They do it basically from watching others. If you are a baby and your parents talk to you and they make faces at you, and eventually you make the noise ma or da, they start jumping up and down and saying, "Oh my God, the baby said mom." And honestly, you didn't say mom or dad. You probably just were babbling. But it's reinforced that this person is excited about this, and you start associating that word ma with mom or da with dad. So that's why in almost every language, mom and dad are words in almost every language. So we also learn our rules of behavior. Now imagine yourself walking down an alley late at night and you see somebody enter the alley that has a baseball bat in their hand. Most of us would try to get out of that alley as quick as possible because we'd be afraid of the person with the baseball bat. So we all have our own canned plans or scripts that we draw upon when confronted with specific situations. So in the case of the alley, somebody enters it and we associate the bat with danger because of all the TV shows we've seen in the past and all the beatings we hear about in the news. So we learn these rules of behavior. We learn to get out of there. However, if we see that the person has a baseball uniform on, we're likely to not be that worried about it because we assume that they've been playing ball somewhere. So the problem is that sometimes we use scripts that are not ideal with certain situations, such as you're talking to a friend and they behave a certain way, which causes us to act in a negative way towards that friend, when really what they're doing is innocent, but that's the way we've learned to deal with somebody behaving in that certain situation. So not all scripts we use are ideal, but the good thing is that we can learn new scripts. So that's the first principle is communication is predicated on the past, but also I would say that a second principle is that we can learn new scripts, and that's what the basic um, issue is with this class, or the base what we're trying to accomplish in this class, is we're trying to learn new skills and new skill sets that we can use and become part of our scripts in the future. So this is an important principle for this class. The second communication principle is that interpersonal communication is continuous. What this means is that when we enter a communication event, we don't stop communicating. So even as the other person is talking to us, we are nodding our heads, we're agreeing or disagreeing, or we're doing something non-verbally that's still communicating to them, even if we're not communicating verbally at all. And this may or may not be intentional. Somebody may be saying something to you, and you may be showing the look of puzzled, that you're puzzled on your face, and that may not be the look that you're intending on giving. So if you think about all of the problems that you've had in your life because of the intentional communication, or what somebody thought was intentional, which really was unintentional by you as far as communication goes. I've been in many fights where I've given a look that was unintentional. And then finally, communication is transactional, which means we try to accomplish things through communication. So that's the third principle. Communication is transactional. It's used to try to accomplish certain goals. The fourth um, communication principle is that interpersonal communication is unavoidable, unrepeatable, and irreversible. So I'm going to tell you a quick story or two. I was one time on a date with a young lady. We went to the Olive Garden and we ordered our food, and they brought out the salad. And inside the salad, they have the peppercini peppers and the olives. And she was talking to me about her friends and her were planning on going spelunking, which is cave diving, which I thought was pretty interesting, especially back in the late 80s. Not a lot of people did that, or not a lot of women did that. It was basically a male-dominated activity. And I thought it was interesting that her and all of her girlfriends were going to go do this, and when it's normally, a male-oriented sport. So I asked her, I said, all of you are going? And when I said all of you, I picked up the olive, and I said, all of you? And she said, oh my God, how sweet. And I was confused for a second, and she thought that I said, I love you, with the use of the olive. All of you, I love you. And that wasn't what I was trying to say at all. Now, I ask you as a class, if I said to her right then, oh no, that's not what I meant. I was trying to say all of you are going with the olive. Would that would that reverse what happened in that communication? It wouldn't. She still would remember the whole situation, and it actually might make my relationship worse with her than better. So I really didn't know what to do in that situation. But it was definitely irreversible. So you have to remember that when you are communicating with somebody and you say something that you don't mean to say, you cannot take it back. You can try, and you probably should if you find out that you're in the wrong, but they're still going to remember that instance. So it's technically irreversible. It's also unrepeatable. A different situation that I was in, another dating situation, is I had moved. I was a graduate student in Cincinnati, and I moved down to Mississippi and to go to school. And I met a woman, and we started dating. And I brought her to my house, and a song came on the radio. And the name of the song is it's by the Casinos. It's called "Kiss Me Each Morning for a Million Years." And the words say, kiss me each morning for a million years, then if it don't work out, if it don't work out, if it don't work out, then you can say goodbye. And it's a very romantic song. So that song came on, and I didn't have much at the house at the time. I had just moved there, and all I had basically was a coffee table with some big throw pillows on it. She was sitting on this pillow. I reached down, pulled her arm up, and we danced to that song. It was on the radio. And every time the chorus came on, I would throw her out as I'm dancing, and I would sing this song, this chorus to her. Kiss me each morning for a million years, then if it don't work out, then we can say goodbye. And I could just see that sparkle in her eye, and she loved that night. And the next day she told me, she said, that was the most romantic night I've ever had in my life. Now I ask you, could I ever repeat that night? If I did the exact same thing, the exact same way, and she reacted when I pulled up the same way, would it be the same night? No, again, because we have history. It's through the past, that communication is predicated on the past. Because we have that past, nothing is really completely repeatable. There could be other romantic nights, but none that could be repeated exactly as that one was. And then finally, interpersonal communication is unavoidable. You cannot not communicate. You're always communicating because you have the nonverbal communication with the other person. So this is one axiom, but it's all put together. It's really three axioms in one, and that was interpersonal communication is unavoidable, unrepeatable, and irreversible. The next axiom is that interpersonal communication is situated, or it's contextual. If I am kissing somebody in public versus in private, you can easily see that it's more appropriate in one setting than it is in the other. So what contextual means is that the setting, either the physical setting or the mental setting, has an effect on the way we communicate. And then the next axiom is that interpersonal communication is indexical. And this basically means that we just measure, we create an index of where we are in relationship with the other person. Are we close to them? Are they distant with us? And so we measure our relationships at particular points and times with other people. And we do that in levels of trust, how much we can control in that relationship, and the level of intimacy. And finally here on this slide, I put meaning is in people, not words. So it's not necessarily that when we're giving words to others that they follow those words or we are giving meaning through the use of words. It's how those words are received by the other person that we co-create meaning. And when I say co-create, we don't create meaning in and of ourselves. We do it through the transactions that we have with others. And this will come all clearer a little bit when I talk about the communication model. The next principles of communication are that communication contains both content and relationship dimensions, that it varies in the degree of conscious encoding, and it includes a series of punctuated events. The first one, communication contains both content and relationship dimensions. The content of a message is what we're trying to accomplish with the message. The relationship shows how we're going about communicating that. So if I said to you, could you turn off the thermostat versus turn off the thermostat? It's two different types of messages. I'm trying to accomplish the same thing with both messages. So the content technically remains the same, but relationship is quite a bit different. One of them, I am asking you if you will turn off the thermostat, whereas in the other, I'm telling you to turn off the thermostat. One of them, I'm trying to show dominance over you, and the other one, I'm treating you more as an equal. So if you think about this, this is important because sometimes it's not what you say, but it's how you say it. You've heard people say that. So we need to treat certain circumstances with different relationship dimensions than others. If you're trying to get your kid to clean their room, by all means, you may just use a command, scare them a little bit, and show who's in charge. That is a different relationship than asking them if they would please clean their room, because you know they're not going to if they're given the choice. Second one here is that interpersonal communication messages vary in the degree of conscious encoding. We've all gone to Walmart or some other store and we've asked the person behind the counter, how are you doing? And they've told us. Tell us that they hate their job, they can't wait till they get off, they wish they had another job, they hate their boss, and all we really want them to say is, hey, it's great, how are you doing? These are ritualized communications that have been violated. We don't normally think that in depth about a lot of situations in our life. Um, so if somebody says hello, we say hello back. If they say, how's your day going? We say it's great, even if it's not. And so we don't think about that. These are phatic types of communication. And then we have our daily rituals. I bet there's people that can predict exactly what you're going to order when you get coffee in the morning, if they've worked with you for a while. So these ritualized communications, we don't necessarily need that much conscious thought regarding how we go about communicating. But if you think about technical communication, trying to explain something to somebody, it requires a lot more thought or a lot more encoding than does ritualized communication. So if somebody's asking for directions, I have to think a minute about how to give them the directions and what is the best way to go about giving those directions. Men tend to give directions in terms of distances, whereas women tend to give directions in terms of landmarks. So I might say, well, you make a right at the first street and go down about 3/4 of a mile until you come to Everett Street, whereas somebody else might say, you go up to the next block, make a right, and go down till you see the Walmart on the right, and you turn the block before the Walmart. So technical communication or explaining things to one another involves a lot more encoding than does ritualized communication. And finally, here we have that communication is a series of punctuated events. What I mean by this is that if somebody asks you, "What did you do last week?" you tend to choose what you want to communicate about and you ignore other elements. So if you said, "What'd you do Friday night?" to me, I don't tell you that I got in my car, I started the car by turning the key, by pumping the gas 3 times, and that I put it in reverse and backed up. I skip all that and I go to what I think that you want to hear. I choose to punctuate certain aspects of that day and tell you about those aspects as opposed to others. So we don't necessarily communicate everything that happens to us. We just communicate those that we think are the most important or the ones that we think that the other person wants to hear about. And that's what's meant by communication as a series of punctuated events. The next principle of communication is that communication involves many channels. And you think about it, how many channels have you used today to communicate with one another? I bet you've text messages to somebody, you've probably called and talked to somebody on the phone. Those are different channels right there. And also when you talk to somebody face to face, that is also a different channel. We have FaceTime, we have Facebook, we have letters, we have all sorts of different messages or different channels that we can send messages through. And each one of these channels varies in the level of media richness. And there's a slide that's coming up that shows a theory that's called media richness theory. And basically what it means is that the more media rich a message is, the more nonverbal elements that we get from that message, and the more able we are to give feedback regarding that message quickly. And then finally we have that communication is historical. It's predicated on the past. So here's the example of the media richness theory. So what makes social media different than face-to-face? And first, we have the temporal structural is different. So if I use social media like Facebook and I post something on there, you may not see what I post for 2 or 3 days. So temporal means time. Face-to-face communication happens in real time, which means it's synchronous, and the Facebook or other types of messages, even text messaging, allows for asynchronous messages or ones that don't happen in real time. So if you send me a message via text messaging, I may not respond to that message for an hour. And that can be both good or bad. So you think about, if you give me a message and I need time to think about what you said, it's good for me to have that time to think about what I'm saying to make sure that I say it the way that I want to say it. And I'd like to equate this to breaking up with somebody. A lot of us say the best way to break up with somebody is face to face, and you may think that yourself. And that may be true in most cases. But I don't know if you've ever been that person where you tried to break up with somebody, you see the tears start coming out of their face, and you've backed out of it because the feedback was there and it was immediate feedback. So it's not necessarily that the best method of communication is face to face or it's highly media rich. Sometimes the more lean aspects of communication could be more ideal given the setting. So I know that when I entered the Marine Corps, a lot of guys got Dear John letters from their girlfriends when they went to boot camp. And it was much easier for them to write a message out, to explain the way that they felt to, exactly, and give that to them, and not let them have that feedback immediately in order for them to get through the method of breaking up. So the more lean a message is, the less able you are to give feedback for, and the less nonverbal cues that you'll have either giving the message or in the feedback. Whereas the more rich messages have much more immediacy, they're much more synchronous. So if you look at the most media rich is face to face, I can see your facial expression. I can see your posture. I can smell your breath. I can see your eye expression, all of that. A close second would be Skyping or FaceTiming somebody. Then even with the telephone, we get some non-verbal elements. And then after that becomes Facebook. And then as you go through to email, Twitter, letters, and texting, it's less rich than face-to-face communication. Now, the one that I have an issue with is the letters. Seems to me like with a letter, just writing the letter means something and it gives it some level of media richness because somebody took the time to actually do something. But that's where I differ from this theory. The theory would argue that letters have no immediate feedback, therefore they're more of a lean type of message. The last characteristic I want to talk about for communication is that interpersonal communication often presents ethical challenges. And so if you think about, there's many situations in our lives where we don't know exactly how to communicate or what to say given a circumstance. So for example, your best friend comes up to you and you're best friends with a couple and he tells you that he's having an affair and he wants to end the affair and he doesn't know why he did it. You still may feel the ethical obligation to the wife to tell her what the truth is. But at the same time, you want to show respect to this person and show loyalty to your friend. So you've got this challenge here. Do I tell the truth? Am I honest? Am I upfront to the other person? Do I withhold that information? What do I do in this circumstance? The text argues that ethical communicators are generally truthful and honest. They generally tell you what the truth is. They're generally upfront in their point of view. But again, I have an issue with this in that there are certain circumstances where being honest may do more damage than good, and it may some loyalty toward another group trump the need to be honest. So this is one that you really have to balance. Second, they have integrity, or they are consistent in their beliefs and actions. For example, my mom, I remember when I was a little kid, one time my mom was yelling at me for lying to her, and she said, "Don't lie to me. You should never lie to your mother. Lying is bad." And then the phone rang a few minutes later, and she said, "Oh, tell him I'm not here." And I didn't know what to do. I thought, okay, so my mom is telling me to behave one way when she's acting another. So she's telling me never to lie, but then she's commanding me to lie. So a person who has integrity does what they say and say what they do. Does that make sense? And they're also so they have integrity. They act the way that they're supposed to act, which is consistent to their beliefs or what they say. Ethical communicators are also fair. They treat people with respect. Okay, so fair means that they listen to two sides of a coin before they act on that. They act with respect to others' points of views. They're responsible for their actions, and they demonstrate empathy for others. And the text talks about the dark side as well, and the argument is that the dark side also affects interpersonal communications, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. So the dark side of interpersonal communication is listed on page 18 of your textbook, and it shows that there's four different sides. There's the bright side, the hard dark side, the easy dark side, and the evil dark side. Dark side messages occur when we fail to use appropriate or ethical behavior. So there are some times where we don't act ethically. And so I have some questions for you. First, why? And should we always act ethically? And then, are there consequences for doing so? And do you use scripts or canned responses in certain situations? So, for example, your best friend comes up to you and then they say, "Do I look fat in this dress?" And your friend's portly. So you want to pay attention to their needs. They want you to say something positive, but at the same time you want to be honest with them. So how do you go about doing that? So here are some strange situations that you might find yourself in at some point in your life, or something similar. Your brother spends a lot of money on his car, but the problem is he spent your mom's money, not his own. He bought a new set of rims for the car and asked you if you like them. How would you respond? Your best friend is in a verbally abusive relationship. Your friend's partner constantly uses degrading language. Your friend tells you that they might move in together or get married. What do you say? Your friend Monica has a birthday coming up and asks you not to say anything to her husband about it because he forgot the previous year, and she wants to see if he remembers it. Do you tell him anyway? And if you don't and he forgets, what do you say to your friend about him? So these are some strange situations that you might find yourself in, or something similar, where you're given an ethical dilemma, um, where you either try to tell the truth, or you tell the truth and uh, you embellish it, or you deny the truth and just go with the easy flow. So so the text talks about going to the dark side on pages 18 and 19. I'm going to probably not test you on this part of the text, except maybe saying something to the effect of a message that is both ethical, that is ethical but inappropriate, falls within which quadrant of the dark side um, messages. That might be a question that I would ask on a test. The dark side is a metaphor for inappropriate and or unethical interpersonal communication. Basically, what this model looks at is if you have a message, messages fall between two continuums. Either they're ethical or they're unethical, and they are either appropriate, inappropriate. And when we're looking at these are by matters of degree. So an ethical message is one that's both honest. I should say a message is honest, that's upfront, that is that has shows your level of integrity. And an unethical message would be just the opposite. It would be ones that are not truthful, that work to damage relationships. And then we have the appropriate and inappropriate side. A message is appropriate. It understands the situation, the context, and the other person, and understands what they need to do to try to make that, to deal with the person's feelings. And an inappropriate message doesn't care too much about the feelings of the other person. So the text gives some examples in for the bright side versus the hard dark side, evil dark side, and easy dark side messages. But the messages don't that they give, the examples they don't give, don't really work if you ask me regarding this model. So, for example, it's it shows that this person named Liz gets a haircut. You don't like the haircut, and she asks you, "What do you think about my haircut?" And the bright side response is supposed to be appropriate and ethical, in which this case it is. Liz, it doesn't matter what I think. I can see that you really like how it looks, and that makes me happy. Yeah, you're giving the bright side. You're telling the truth. It doesn't matter what you think, but you're not being upfront in your communication. So I don't really think that that is the best response to give. I might have said something like, it's a big change for me. I don't really care for it myself, but I think that I see that you like it. I really don't know how to respond with a bright side response here. I don't think it's possible to give a total bright side response. They said for the hard dark side response, wow, Liz, it's a dramatic change. I liked your hair long, and I've always admired the red highlights you had, but I'm sure it will grow on me. What you're doing is, according to this, is you're hurting her feelings. You're giving a message that is inappropriate, but one that's ethical. You're still telling the truth. But to me, I think this actually takes her feelings more into consideration in their example, and that you're at least telling that you don't really care for it that much, and you're telling her that you'll eventually, hopefully, like it. So I don't know how to respond to the dark side, except that the easiest way for me to deal with it for this class is to just try to think about messages and how they'll be taken by the other person, and try to give the most appropriate message that you can and the most ethical, unless, of course, you're looking to ruin a relationship and break off a relationship with somebody. Then go to the evil dark side and give a message that damages the relationship, such as, it doesn't matter what you do to your hair, you're so fat and ugly, which is the example that they give on page 19 for the evil dark side. So as far as testing goes on this, I'm probably not going to test on this model. I'm just brought it up because it is in the textbook. So just take it as you will. So the text goes on and it talks about a communication process, and it talks about a model. It shows a model of communication. I would like to start off by talking about the linear model of communication, which was the mother of all communication models. This model started with Shannon and Weaver. They were two researchers working for Bell Laboratories back in 1948. And what they were trying to do is trying to reduce the amount of noise, as you see in the middle here of this here. They were trying to reduce the amount of noise that happened over the telephone lines when somebody was sending a message from a sender to a receiver. So the model kind of looked like this. We had a sender who was the information source, say me, and we have a receiver of communication, which we'll pretend is you. So I'm sending you a message, and I have to use a transmitter to encode that message into some sort of electrical impulse, and then send it through the airways, in this case the telephone lines, which is the channel, to be received by you and decoded so you can understand that message. But the problem is no matter how well I do this, there was always noise or static on the line. So that what they were trying to do is figure out a way to reduce the amount of noise or the static so the receiver could hear the message more clearly from the sender. So that was the very first communication model. And from that, all communication models kind of grew. So this is the model as it is today, and I have a couple of elements on here that weren't on the original model, I should say the model that's in the textbook. So first of all, we have a sender, which is me, and we have the receiver, which is you. And I still send you a message through a channel. And no matter what, there's always going to be noises in that message. But before I even send you a message, I have to choose what I'm going to say in order to best convey meaning. So for example, if I had three chairs in a room and one of them was a bar stool, one of them was a traditional chair, and the other one was a recliner, it would probably be smarter for me to say, I would like you to sit in the recliner, than would it be for me to say, I would like you to sit in that chair, and have you ask me which chair I'm talking about. So I'm probably going to go through the process of figuring out, okay, what is the best word to use to get them to sit in that specific chair? And in this case, the word is recliner. So I would ask you to sit in the recliner. And that is the process of encoding. When we encode messages, we are choosing the words that we want to use. So encoding this message, please sit in the recliner, would lead to less noise than if I said sit in the chair. So I have to choose that message, and then I have to send it through a channel. In this case, it would be face to face, and there would be very little noise. You would understand what I'm trying to accomplish and the message. But there's still always noise, no matter what we do when it comes to giving messages. And that's illustrated by these lightning bolts. Noise happens in a lot of different ways. When we normally think of noise, we think of physical sounds that we hear that can be an impediment to listening. For example, if you're talking to me and a dog is barking, the dog is creating noise and it's making it harder for me to understand you. That is a type of physical noise. But physical noise does not have to be something that we hear. It could be something that we see that's distracting, or something that is any type of physical impediment. So, for example, you're talking to me and a light is flickering, or there's a fight outside and I'm watching the fight through a window. Those would also be physical distractions or physical types of noise. Along with physical noise comes psychological noise or mental noise. No matter how fast I talk, you can think faster than I can talk. I'm going to post a little video on YouTube for speed reading, and we can read. I can read almost 1,000 words a minute if prompted to do so slowly and get up to that level. And so I can read that fast, but there's no way I can speak that fast. So we have a lot of free time in our brain to think about other things. And so even as I'm speaking in this class or in any class, students are also thinking about what's coming up in their next classes. They're thinking about their relationships. They're thinking about what they're going to have for lunch. All of these thoughts create psychological or mental noise. They're basically thinking about things instead of trying to listen. And third type of noise that we can have is called physiological noise. And physiological noise is the noise that we have when we don't feel well, when there's something wrong with our body. Either we're too hot, we're too cold, we have a headache, we have a sore throat, whatever it is that is creating an issue for us to be able to communicate or listen. So, for example, if I have a migraine headache and somebody's talking to me, I'm not going to be trying to listen to them very well, and it's just going to be painful for me to listen. So it makes it harder for me to get the meaning that they're trying to get across. And then finally, we have what's called semantic noise. Semantic noise is noise that is caused by the words that you choose. I'll say that again. Semantic noise is the noise that is caused by the words that you choose in the process of encoding. An easy example of this is if you were trying to get people to line up and you said, I want all the men to line up over here and all the girls to line up over here. Notice I said men and girls, I didn't say men and women. And for some people, that might create noise. They might say to themselves, why didn't they use women? Why did this person call us girls instead of women? And they're going to put up a wall to not listen to you as well because of that. Other examples are to use jargon, such as, well, today I'm talking about the ontological and epistemological assumptions of communication. Those words are hard to understand. And because they're hard to understand, you lose people when you're using them. So the best method of giving messages is to choose words that people know, that are common, that are easy to follow, and that are not sexist, not racist, that are in tune to people's sense of well-being, that they pay attention to their needs, and in doing so, you can reduce the amount of semantic noise. And so I send you a message that I've encoded through a channel, and I have to deal with all these different types of noise. So semantic, I may try to choose the words that are best to choose. I try to choose a setting that has very little physical noise associated with it. I try to make sure that you understand the importance of this message to try to reduce the amount of psychological noise. And I try to make you comfortable, or I try to hit you when you're not feeling bad in any way, to try to reduce the amount of physiological noise. And then you get that message from me and you go through the process of decoding. That's where you create the meaning from the message. So it's easy for, if I said sit on the recliner, you'd understand where to sit. You'd probably sit on the recliner. The decoding would be flawless. But other messages are much harder, such as when you're getting directions from somebody and you may ask for more clarification from that message. And when you're doing that, when you're asking for clarification, you're encoding messages as well, and you're sending messages back to the sender. And that is called feedback. Feedback happens both verbally and non-verbally. Verbally, you could ask questions. give comments, and non-verbally you could give looks such as I'm puzzled by what you're trying to say, which hopefully the sender will pick up on and modify their message to send it back to you. Now, if you notice, what happens is that I'm giving you a message. You may be giving me feedback. In fact, you're always giving me feedback, even as I'm giving you the message, which may cause me to modify my message to you in the process. Because of that, this is called the transactional model of communication. We co-create meaning. We don't create meaning in and of ourselves. I send you a message, you interpret that message, you give me information back, which causes me to modify my message, and so forth until we create a fairly well-meaninged message. So there are another element of communication that I need to talk about here is the context. The context is where this conversation takes place, including the physical context, which is where we're speaking, the social context, what is the social setting that we're in, the historical context, what is our history with one another, what is the psychological context, what is going on as a group, and finally the cultural context, what is going on as a society. So I'll give you some examples of each of these. Typically, the physical context of a class is the actual classroom itself. In this case, the physical context is the online environment for which I'm speaking. The social context has to do with how we are communicating with one another. What is the social dimensions? Are we in a setting where we're as friends, or are we in a setting where we're supposed to be competing with one another? What is the setting in relationship to one another regarding the physical context? The historical context is our past experiences with one another. If I know, for example, that I'm speaking to a person that takes things really seriously and gets upset very easily, taking that into consideration might change my messages to be less direct and less straightforward and maybe more polite than if it was somebody that I have a history with where we give upfront messages to one another. I taught at the University of Louisiana, actually Louisiana State University, on September 1st, September 11th, 2001. And right then, everybody after 9/11 had the same psychological views about what was going on. And so we didn't know what was going on. Everyone was confused, everyone was worried, and I had to try to teach a communication class, even though everybody shared a similar psychological perception at the time. It was a type of noise that was shared by everybody. And so when a type of noise is shared by everybody, it becomes part of the context. It's not noise for one person, it's noise for everybody. So psychological or mental noise that is shared by everybody is part of the context or creates the psychological context. And September 11th was an easy example of that. Everybody shared the same perceptions regarding what is going on. And then finally, we have the cultural context. Our culture is quite a bit different than other cultures. If you, say, are in the Middle East, for example, or Mexico, or South America, the cultural context can have an effect on how communication is taken by people as well. So you have to be aware of the culture to understand the best way to deliver messages. For example, in a Japanese culture, people are very indirect because if you are direct, it can be insulting to somebody or it can make them feel bad about themselves. So very indirect messages take place regarding the culture. So understanding that context is important as well for the communication process as well. And then the last thing I have on this model that is different, this this is the one part that is different than the model, is this concept of feed forward. And feed forward is the anticipation that we have of how a message is going to be taken by the receiver. So understanding that anticipation will help me create a message that deals with the presumed feedback from the other person. So for example, if I am in a different culture and I do understand that people are likely to take a message too seriously or more seriously than I want them to, I may use a more indirect form of communication in order to give them that message. Um, Another example, if I was entering a classroom where most of the students failed the first test, I may enter that classroom and say to the class, you guys, maybe I didn't cover this information as good as I should have because the test grades weren't as good as I was hoping. By me saying that, I may be saying that don't kill the messenger. I'm going to help you work through this, instead of me just coming in and saying, you guys, the test scores were pitiful. So this is the communication model. It's very common. Every class that you take in communication deals with this communication model. And it's important that you understand the different elements. You are both a sender and a receiver. I am both a receiver and a sender. We send messages through different types of channels. Channels can be anything from email to face to the telephone. There's always going to be some sorts of noise because we're different people, and no matter how hard I try, you'll be thinking about other things besides just what I'm saying, so it's going to create some level of noise. And we have to always deal with the physical context when dealing with messages. So if you understand that, you understand the communication model. For us to have interpersonal competence, we must give messages that are both effective and appropriate. Effective messages achieve the goals of the interaction or the instrumental purpose of the message. They accomplish what we're trying to accomplish with the message. An appropriate messages conform to the social, relational, and ethical expectations of behavior, and that's usually viewed at from the receiver of that message. So we're trying to be both competent, effectively competent, and appropriately. We're trying to increase our competency level in both of those to become better communicators. I put down a little model that I like. It has to do with concern for yourself versus concern to others. And basically, if you look at this, getting what you want, what you're trying to accomplish in the message, getting your desired outcome, the more effective you are at that, the more happy you are, generally speaking, about getting what you want. But we also need to be concerned about the other person. So appropriateness of communication has to do with concern for yourself versus concern for others. If you're only concerned about yourself, that is inappropriate. You need to have concern for others as well. So let's take a look at this model really quickly. You look at the top left, I have the word steamroller. Now a steamroller, they have a very aggressive personality. And for them, winning is everything. They get what they want, but they get what they want by pushing others down. So they go through life thinking, I win, you lose. And if you have that personality, which some of us, in fact, all of us do at times, we have a steamroller personality at times, it's likely to damage relationships because you are putting your needs above those of others. The opposite of that would be a doormat. This type of person is very accommodative. They try to accommodate to the needs of others, and they don't necessarily worry about getting their own needs met. I have a friend who's very much a doormat. She wants to be happy. She wants other people to be happy with her. So she gives up what she needs to others because it's better for her to have the relationship be stable than it is to try to force her own point. That can be a problem. I have a cousin who's married whose husband almost left her because she was a doormat, and he wanted somebody to stand up for herself. And he wanted her to stand up when she didn't feel that her needs were met. But she was always saying, well, you will just do whatever you want to do. And that started getting on to him for a while. So steamrollers don't necessarily, a doormat is a good person to be with a steamroller because the steamroller wants to get what they want and the doormat's willing to give it. But the problem is the steamroller also wants somebody who's challenging. So after a while, these two are not compatible either. So we should try to never be doormats. We should all strive to be more diplomats. Diplomats collaborate with one another. They cooperate with one another. They try to look at their own needs, but they also try to look at the needs of others. So they have a very high concern for others and for themselves. So they're assertive. They go through life thinking, okay, I win, but I'm going to make sure others win as well. So relationships are important for these people, but so are personal needs. And then finally, we have what I call roadkill. Roadkill are ineffective in their communication style. They have low concern for themselves and they have low concern for others. Uh, and so they're ineffective at getting what they want. So if you think about this, my little brother one time I called and I called my mom's cell phone and my little brother answered the phone and he said, "Cy, what do you want?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to talk to mom." And he said, "Cy, I guess I'll go find her." And you don't understand, he actually said "Cy." And when he did that, all I wanted to do was punch him in the face. Wasn't happy. It made me think about him more negatively. And he was having a bad day, and he wanted to let me know that he was having a bad day and try to ruin my day as well. So roadkill people have very abrasive personalities. They want to be alone. They don't want to deal with other people. They're going through life thinking, I'm losing, and therefore I'm going to bring you down with me. And so nobody really wants to be roadkill. Now, the reason I bring this up is we're all of these at times. With certain people, I'm very diplomatic with. Other people, I'm a steamroller. Some people, I'm a doormat. When I'm having a bad day, you may catch me at the wrong time and I may be roadkill. We're all fall within all of these quadrants at times. The problem is a lot of us choose one of these quadrants over the others and we stick with that quadrant most of the time. And that can be bad for relationships. So if you're a steamroller, you should try to reduce the amount of steamrolling that you do and try to become more of a diplomat. In fact, all of these we should try to become more of a diplomat because a diplomat is concerned about themselves and what others have. So this is a generalized personality types that I created, and it's easy to follow. And we'll talk about this model later on when we talk about conflict and negotiation. The same kind of model comes up in that as well, having to do with how we go about dealing with conflict. So the focus of the textbook and the upcoming chapters is on how we can go about improving our competency in interpersonal communication. So the text talks about how we can go about acquiring interpersonal communication knowledge, which can work to increase our emotional intelligence or our rhetorical sensitivity to others. What this means basically is we can improve our ability to understand other people's point of views and to pay attention to those point of views and to become sensitive to those points of views so we can draft messages that work with them instead of trying to force our own opinions onto them or working to increase our relationships with others through the way we go about using language. It also talks about how we can go about increasing our skills, including the different types of micro skill sets that we can use and different templates that we can use towards specific interactions. So the text will give us templates on how we can go about um, active listening, or listening to others who want us to listen without criticizing them or criticizing what they have to say, and also how we can go about using critical listening skills, or the methods of critical listening when we have to evaluate those messages. It'll give us skills on paraphrasing, or how to repeat messages back to other people in our own words to verify understanding. It'll give us those skills to help us understand how to praise others more effectively, and also how to describe our behaviors and describe our feelings instead of evaluating those behaviors and feelings, or the feelings and behaviors of others. And we can use these skill sets to help develop or modify our own skill scripts, so we can draw upon those and become better communicators with others. Um, I would like you to be motivated to demonstrate this competence. So as you're going through, practice the skills that you learn, or practice the skills that you see, and try to understand the benefits to you and to others in demonstrating this competence. And also be willing to unlearn some of your old or ineffective scripts and create new ones. In other words, toss out what doesn't work. Also, I would like you to try to develop behavioral flexibility, trying different plans, and uh, seeing what works and what doesn't, and then adding to the scripts what you think is helpful, and getting rid of those that you don't think are helpful. And finally, the text talks about in this how we can go about creating develop improvement plans on page 25. Basically, it says for us to state the problem that we have, state the goal, outline a specific plan for reaching the goal, and identify how you'll know if you reach that goal. If you look on page 25, you can see some examples of that. Um, and this is basically what we're going to be doing in the next 16 weeks, is trying to develop some of our competencies in different areas. The text at the end of every chapter talks about social media and interpersonal communication, and how it impacts communication in that given topic. So social media, those that are highly accessible technologies, facilitate communication and interaction. Facilitate doesn't mean improve. It means to conduct communication and interaction. And so those highly accessible technologies. Okay, so I have a question if you agree with this or not. Basically, that question has to do with, first of all, are most social media highly accessible, and or do they help facilitate, or do they destroy communication? So messages like Twitter, Facebook, so forth, those are social media types. But if you look at Trump's use of Twitter, for example, even if you're both Republicans and Democrats, um, both agree that sometimes he uses Twitter inappropriately, and it doesn't necessarily facilitate his communication or interaction with others. So that's why I put this up here. We use digital communication to manage our personal identities. Again, I talked about that. We take pictures of ourselves and put them on Facebook, but we always take the second or third or fifth selfie because we want to give a certain image of ourselves to others. So we use it to manage our personal identities to others, to try to create a better version of ourselves than we maybe think that we are. And our social network consists of people we know and are connected by friendship, common interests, family ties, beliefs, or knowledge. So our social network, we have both the online social network, social media through social media, and we also have a social network, which is everybody that's involved in the social media, but also our friends and those of who we communicate with on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis.